Garrett?
I thank the chairman, and to the congressman. It's interesting that the ranking member says that this is what he has to look forward to in retirement, the mellowing that we see here. So I don't know whether we hear some pronouncement from the ranking member with regard to his retirement. If not, I guess we'll go proceed. Okay. I thought this would be the committee hearing of the week then, in which case. So in any event, to the congressman. You began your issue with regard to the lack of bipartisanship nature of the committee. I'm thinking back of a couple of years ago, we had the 9/11 Commission. You mentioned some other commissions where it was done in a truly bipartisan manner. So can you just comment, just briefly, if you will, did the majority give you complete bipartisanship with regard to the staff and to the resources, and also to the areas that you were going to be, as a committee or as a commission, study and investigate and finally report upon? I guess that's one or two questions. And thirdly, you had some sort of comment you wanted to make with regard to the final vote as well.
Thank the gentleman.
Sure.
I thought it was pretty obvious when the move was made at the beginning of the Congress to create a committee which was structured along partisan lines, 6 and 4. The Democrat side got the chairman, and the minority side got the vice chairman rather than co-chairman. That my friend from Massachusetts' argument that I'm very familiar with the partisan environment was one of the reasons I decided to go into this, because it was clear from the beginning it was a partisan environment. I was going to try to make sure that it didn't wind up a partisan environment. And as we began, it was clear that there was an attempt to try to get a broader base. However, as the commission went on and decisions needed to be made, and more importantly, the use of the commission started to shift. I have no question that this body and the Congress should not have held up in passing legislation. I just think a lot of the legislation was off-the-shelf stuff that people wanted to do with derivatives in general. They hadn't been able to. As I said, a lot like the stimulus bill, here's a chance to dump some stuff in that we wanted to do for a while, and became part of the Dodd-Frank fresh and new movement. What can you do with a commission that's created, and less than a month after it was created, the President offers his solutions and the Congress moves forward with their solutions? There's a lot of things you can do with it, especially, I believe, because the former majority thought they were going to be a majority in this Congress as well. It's very difficult, I'll tell you. When Republicans were in power and the administration was Republican, we could not go back to the Dingell playbook and go after the administration because they were Republican and we were Republican. Democrats did a great job of oversight for decades because the Republicans were in the presidency and the Democrats were in the Congress. So when you look at what you can do with this commission, one, you can use it to go after the villains and help the victims if that's the result and you're in the majority. You can use it, even if you're in the minority, to hold hearings about those issues. And so when you wind up with a series of 6-4 votes that literally, in my opinion, split the commission on a partisan basis, the result is a partisan conclusion. And I have no qualms about that. I thought that was what it was going to be to begin with. My job was to try to overcome it.
So let's go into that a little bit of detail. As far as the things that were done and that were not done, and both of you can answer this, what was done, I guess, is case studies of 10 specific financial institutions and finding the problems or lack thereof in the financial institutions, but not, I understand, any specific case studies with regard to the regulatory failures. Can you comment on why it wasn't done, and how then can you come up with the conclusions if you're not going to do it in that same fashion, the conclusions that you've come up with?
Yes, may I comment on, or
is that a question to me or the chairman?
I'll go first to the chairman, and then you can do the...
Yes, we did the following. This is important to understand. First of all, let me just say very quickly that, you know, I really do stand on the report and the integrity of the report, the facts that are in it. The facts themselves have not been challenged, and everyone can draw their own conclusions, but that 400-some pages Mr. Thomas talked about...
But we were looking for you for the conclusion, really.
Well,
for everybody
and
to come
we
up
laid them out, but I want to say that every member had full opportunity to participate. All members had opportunity to attend hearings all over the country. In fact, I went to Bakersfield. I had the great chance to go with the vice chairman to Bakersfield for a very informative hearing about what had happened at the community level. All materials and interviews were made available to all commissioners. All drafts of all the reports of all the chapters were made available to commissioners for comments. Some chose to, some did not, and all staff were jointly approved by Mr. Thomas and me. What we did as a general kind of approach to our work is we did a look at overall research, the large picture. And because of our time frame, we then did 10 case studies of financial institutions, including a very deep scrub on Fannie Mae. We also looked at other institutions at a lesser level, but we looked very specifically at the roles of policymakers and regulators. We looked at the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and let me just speak to the nonpartisan nature of this. If you look at this report, sir, we were very critical of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's oversight of Citigroup when Mr. Geithner was in charge of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. We looked at HUD, its affordable housing goals. We looked at the role of the Office of Control over the Currency and the Office of Thrift Supervision. So we looked at both financial institutions and regulators, and I think you will find that we found, without regard to party, without regard to private sector, public sector, that this crisis was avoidable, both in failures of regulation and failures in corporate risk management.
Thank you. The gentlelady from New York.
Did Mr. Thomas want to respond?
30 seconds.
Sure.
Well, it's hard to get Congress.
Look, Warren Buffett came before us in New York and said he didn't think housing prices would go down the way they did. People who are supposed to be gurus in this said they weren't aware of it. You have to read a clever book by Michael Lewis, if you haven't, The Big Short, because he winds up writing a book about those 3 or 4 people who actually made money on it. I asked him, well, what about John Paulson? He said, John Paulson's been around for a long time. He was a joke. We all laughed at him. He had this view of what was going on. Turns out he was right, but it was after the fact. If Warren Buffett didn't know it was coming, how can you say, very nonchalantly, it all could have been avoidable?
Thank you, Mr. Malone.